The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. Hey guys, today I'm here with Alpen Labs. I have David Soroy and Sims building, hopefully, a ZK rollup on Bitcoin. So if you guys want to introduce yourself and then your roles at Alpen. Sims, if you want to go ahead first, and then, yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having us on, Gwart. I'm Sims Dalton. I'm one of the co-founders of Alpen Labs. I'm also the CEO. Wear a bunch of hats, come from technical backgrounds, so kind of go into the technicals as well.
Yep. And I'm David Soroy. I guess I lead ecosystem at Alpen, which is kind of just code for doom scrolling Twitter and coming up with ideas of what we want the ZK rollup to look like.
Awesome. So I think that's a good intro. What do you want the ZK rollup to look like? What are you guys working on right now? Yeah,
we're working on a bunch of things, but I'd say the best ways to describe it is core infrastructure that first enables trust minimized rollups, a way to take BTC and make it available in off-chain protocols in as secure and best kind of UX way as possible. On top of that, building out the core infrastructure. We're pretty opinionated on the rollup stack, so over the last year, we've been really building out the rollup stack from scratch. So sort of the core infrastructure is where the focus has gone, and a lot of the focus right now is also on what kind of applications and what kind of use cases we've provided here.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I can pass that over to David. What applications do you think people want to see on Bictoin L2s? And we kind of talked. You can just give us sort of broad strokes, like, what are you excited about in terms of applications? We're kind of jumping around here, but it was a decent way to start. So if you want to talk to us a little bit about like what you're trying to sort of, from the biz dev side, maybe like create on Alpen and what you want to see built here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is like, everybody knows this. There's a little bit of an existential crisis going on in like, Ethereum and Solana, everywhere else, where people are like, where are the apps? Like, are we actually going to solve all these things with, ZK and data availability and infrastructure? And then just like, all this stuff, like we're going to hope that there's going to be some like great feature that comes out of it. In my opinion, like it's pretty obvious, like our revolution started with money and like, we still think there's a long way to go with that. And so, it's beyond simply having like a store of value, which is essential. And I think Bitcoin set the stage for that, but it's, giving kind of self-custody to everybody in the world, adding payments, adding, private payments, giving a lot of the DeFi features. Ideally, like I do have this dream of, that we could set the canonical price of Bitcoin on chain. Like right now that price is essentially set, on Coinbase, on Binance. Can we get to such a point where, these chains are so well optimized and so high performant, and you have people like your sponsor, like Ellipsis, who are doing great work. Like, can they, get to a point where you actually have such a huge amount of liquidity where it's like, we are setting this price like transparently on chain. Like, I think that would be really badass. And so all of these things like that are, money and I guess tangentially money related, like finance, that in my opinion is the use case. And it's a gargantuan one and one that I think that we're kind of steadfastly committed to. If as a byproduct of the kind of tools that we build out, people want to use our chain to, build Uber on the blockchain, indent the coin, like, go for it. But I think our focus is very much on money and making Bitcoin endgame money.
So I have a thought and you can tell me if this is a reasonable thought or not, but mostly what I am seeing now we're kind of going back to like the actual core build out of what you guys are trying to do, at least from the protocol layer. So I hear a lot about Bitcoin rollups and I would put these main Bitcoin rollups, but actually just any projects building on Bitcoin now, right? We have this like influx of new projects being built on Bitcoin. And I get the impression that, and this is all formulated in my head, so once again, tell me if this is incorrect, but I get the impression there's kind of like three categories right now that I would say. There's what's possible today on Bitcoin. There's what's possible with pretty hacky designs, maybe not the most efficient or most functional. And then there's also what is possible in the future, either with, crazy, ZK math and, hacking away, or with opcodes. The reason I say this is because a lot of times I listen to podcasts and it's not always clear to me if people are talking about, can we do this now? Can we sort of do this now? Or is this something only in the future? So I want to get like some background on maybe how you were designing Alpen, the chain, and if there's, sort of unlocks that you still need, or if, this is functional now and can be put into production. Obviously, you guys haven't launched yet, but I want to get like sort of a little bit of, I don't know, just you can kind of ramble, but like tell me if you think that that's more or less correct on like the kind of landscape as of right now.
As we're designing the system today, we're assuming no new opcodes or no new functionality, consensus changing functionality gets added to Bitcoin. And so within those constraints, what is the most secure way to access BTC is remains kind of to be the question to be solved. BitVM, kind of the early ideas were really interesting. When it initially came out, very impractical in terms of just like the initial primitives, but there's definitely the seeds of an amazing idea there, which is getting Bitcoin to reason about arbitrary computation. And so if Bitcoin can actually reason about arbitrary computation, then maybe it can reason about the state of another blockchain or state of some kind of off-chain protocol. These kinds of building blocks allow us to build in certain guarantees around who do you need to trust to withdraw funds back from the off-chain protocol that you put funds into. So really over the last 1 year, there's been so much innovation and progress over making this initial germ, the initial sort of idea that was BitVM into something much more practical and potentially something that could work in production at scale without a lot of the issues originally in the design that were there. So how do we actually get this, reduce the complexity significantly, or reduce the liquidity requirements, or the time it takes for Bitcoin to adjudicate between a challenger and a defender? How do we get that from something like 9 months, 6 months, all the way down to on the order of a week, 2 weeks? And so it's been amazing seeing the innovation that the community at large has put into that. Alpen certainly has contributed a lot of ideas over the last 6 months. We have some research papers that we put out, some implementations that we've merged in, and we're feeling pretty good in terms of where things stand today in terms of getting out the next generation bridge and way of accessing BTC to not just rollups, to other off-chain protocols, perhaps like the shielded client-side validation type protocols, ZK coin type protocols. Very very similar kinds of design and reuse of the work there. But definitely, we're also looking. You mentioned these three categories. In the future, the trust assumptions kind of required in getting BTC off chain and then withdrawing it back are still this kind of one of n single honest party assumption, as well as some active operator sort of assumption. And so we're looking at reducing that further, and it's certainly things like Opcat or the great script restoration projects. I mean, these any kind of increase in design space that allows for covenant functionality would allow us to take the bridge that we are currently constructing and have launched to really minimize the kind of complexity and even get rid of that single honest party kind of trust assumption. So we want to see progress on that front, certainly, and kind of reducing complexity. But that timeline is definitely unclear, and soft forks on Bitcoin do take time. So we're both excited, kind of looking further and reducing some of that complexity, but we're quite optimistic that the simplifications in the primitives around BitVM based bridges have are sort of at this point where we can have something in production that is much more secure than what's possible today, which is largely federated majority multi-sig kind of assumptions around BTC.
Yeah. What is kind of like the bleeding edge right now of the BitVM construct? And also, at this point, I think people can go back and listen to other podcasts or read about BitVM. So you don't have to go too much, but maybe tell us where we're at in terms of like how far we push BitVM. Or I know you guys, like you were talking about, have sort of proposed variations of this. So I'm curious, like what is the current state of these kind of like BitVM bridges?
Yeah, so BitVM 2 is where a lot of the kind of leading teams at the moment are focused on, which is this one round BitVM approach where there's a claim about some kind of withdrawal being made by someone, and essentially that claim can be challenged, and the adjudication, so Bitcoin being the judge of deciding, is the person that made the claim correct or the challenger correct, that can happen over a single round. And a round typically here is 1 or 2 weeks, depending really on the design. That, even several months ago seemed pretty impractical of how do we actually get this. We're getting to numbers where that BitVM 2 type construction is possible, where the amount of on-chain cost essentially to defend a challenge or to challenge someone or disprove a person making the claim. These numbers are practical. They're no longer in the tens or hundreds of megabytes of on-chain cost territory, but in single digit, megabyte in the event of a challenge, which is already rare territory, which fits within a block. And so that's kind of where teams are focused on right now. There are different bridge designs. I think that's kind of where we're seeing some innovation. We have our own bridge design. The ZeroSync team, collaboration with other folks, recently published a paper on one type of BitVM 2 design. Some teams are focused on how do we get the challenge to be permissionless. So instead of just one of the federation members being able to challenge a claim, how do we enable any user, any participant to either pull funds, to create a challenge or just essentially challenge any kind of claim that's made within this protocol. That's certainly something that we're focused on as well. BitVM 2 enables that kind of construction. Definitely things to test out there in terms of like the economics of how all that works. So that's kind of, I would say that's where the state of the art is right now in terms of it's permissionless one round adjudication of challenges on arbitrary computation, and that enables these optimistic ZK bridge designs. And in terms of the exact bridge design, that's something that several teams are really iterating on that design and also implementing it. And so I think we'll see maybe different flavors of those designs come out over the next couple of months.
And just to add quick clarity for that, because I think a lot of the audience gets confused on this. Like there's two separate things. There's the kind of verification of like the zero knowledge proof, this kind of like, BitVM style, like validation of the challenge response. And then there's the actual bridge implementation built on top of that. These are two separate but related things that often get conflated with each other. And so like if you look at something like the criticism that the Taproot Wizard guys like Eric and Udi like mounted in this whole like liquidity fronting issue, that is more on the bridge design problem, which is the latter problem rather than the former one that I mentioned. And I think, as Sim said, like a lot of us are aligning on this BitVM 2 approach, which we can maybe marginally optimize and bring it closer to like, a trust, like fully trustless, permissionless, or like, do it in less than like 2 weeks. But it's really where you're going to start seeing like differences on actual bridge design and how are people addressing this liquidity fronting issue. Okay,
like zooming out a little bit, I'm not an expert, but I followed the Ethereum rollup centric roadmap so far, right? I'm curious, now that you guys have kind of a fresh slate, and I'm interested to hear from both of you here, what have you learned? What are some of the advantages you see with Ethereum's roadmap currently? And then also, what have you guys learned maybe in terms of how you want to see Bitcoin implement rollups? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'll quickly just say, we don't have a burn on Ethereum. So, we really don't care how much usage Bictoin L1 gets. We think that it will get obscene amounts of usage and it will like solve the security budget. But I think you see people like, Resnick, like pushing this idea of, hey, like we need to, improve the L1. I think people are like fearing the pressure to like, bring utility back to like Ethereum L1. And I just don't think that's a problem that really applies to Bitcoin because, in Ethereum L1, like you already have this expressivity. Right. You're really just like siphoning off, other expressivity to execution environments on the L2. With Bitcoin, like it actually quite literally like grows the pie. Like it brings in new functionality that wasn't there. So we don't have this pressure to bring on, something like base rollups, and I think that's like a huge point of contention, like coming up on the Ethereum roadmap that I think pretty much all Bitcoiners that I know are like, no, we don't want, base rollups. Like we know that potentially leads to like massive MEV. Like I don't see any teams designing around that. So I think we just have more clarity on the roll-up roadmap in that sense.
Yeah, I would, before you go, Sims, I would echo one other thing. The expressivity point, I think is spot on. I mean, Bitcoin does not compete for the expressivity of its L2s, right? It doesn't have these, like nobody thinks that putting an AMM on Bitcoin is going to be a good idea. This is not the case. So like, it's not to say that, Bitcoin has some special status, but the reality is, rollups on Ethereum may in fact be parasitic. It's much less of a compelling, I think, narrative for Bitcoin to say that they're parasitic because Bitcoin can't do any of that stuff. The other thing too is if you're going to export a monetary premium, you kind of need the token to have a monetary premium, right? And I think that's maybe, and just the way that proof of stake works with fees, it can in fact, reduce the security when you're sort of siphoning off to these L2s. So I would definitely agree on those points.
Are you saying ETH is not money?
I'm saying that there may be advantages for Bitcoin exporting its monetary premium versus ETH exporting its monetary premium when every day people have to argue online as to whether or not ETH has a monetary premium. So I think it's sort of like self-evident. But Sims, what are your thoughts in terms of, looking at the Ethereum roadmap and like things you may think they've done well versus things you think that, maybe Bitcoin can improve upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one part of this is we want to be more opinionated about what kind of applications we really want to support through, the first-class primitives that are available on the stack. We think that just because there's, smart contracts and expressivity doesn't really mean we have, a million on-chain finance or any kind of application. We think that there are a set of applications that really make a lot of sense, focused around BTC and game money and interoperability with that, and just being opinionated about bringing the best primitives available. So payments certainly is a really interesting application using BTC as a collateral but primitives that we're seeing in other ecosystems that we think are really interesting is like the keyless accounts, work that like Aptos and Sui and others are working on. We think that like reducing kind of the UX and bringing that overhead, like improving the UX and kind of bringing that to BTC, to other maybe stable coins and other sorts of assets makes a lot of sense, and having these working on these as first class primitives makes a lot of sense. Bringing in privacy primitives makes a lot of sense, and so I think generally just being more opinionated and providing these primitives to sort of guide the types of applications that we think makes a lot of sense in the context of Bitcoin native execution environment is appealing, certainly.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about like sequencers, how you see this play out. There's, kind of right now, all L2s have single sequencers. There's one based rollup, I think, but for the most part, they use these single sequencers, right? So people think this is great. It provides usually better execution, less likelihood of getting sandwiched, and background and front run, so on and so forth. First of all, how do you view the future of these sequencers on Bitcoin, and is it a big deal as to whether or not it's a single sequencer, or should we actively work toward decentralizing the sequencer?
Yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts on this, and some of it, I'm still mulling over and it's just kind of thinking over. But I think there's definitely some progressive decentralization over time. I think that the single sequencer piece gets a little overblown, in the criticisms. I think that it is okay launching with single sequencer here, and I think the dynamics of kind of having the single block producer, on the roll up is quite different, than on the L1. I think the focus should really be on, can we get forced inclusion to be done right? Can we parameterize that correctly? And, basically kind of launching with that and figuring out progressive, decentralization or progressive, reduction of the censorship risk around the single sequencer, I think is the right way to go. In the roll-up context, like even with the single sequencer, as I mentioned in one of the criticisms, like they're not able, in a well-designed roll-up, like the single sequencer is not able to steal funds, from transactions that take place on the roll-up. Kind of having a single party there doesn't mean that they can kind of just steal funds. The biggest risk really is around censorship, and basically introducing mechanisms to prevent censorship, through things like forced inclusion. And even when we talk about pre-confirmations that the sequencer gives, making sure that they're slashable pre-confirmations and actually, not trust the sequencer type of pre-confirmations. I think these things, investing resources in these things make a lot of sense. And then over time, with more volume, like kind of tackling this problem from different angles, like figuring out how to expand the sequencer set, figuring out, how sequencers are selected, or even, using privacy as a tool, sort of in that context, makes a lot of sense. But I don't think all of those things, the perfect kind of solution needs to be there, at launch, and it is okay, kind of progressively decentralizing this.
Yeah, David, do you have any thoughts?
No, I pretty much agree with Sims. It's like I think the sequencer criticism, like other criticisms with rollups, are valid, but probably overblown. If people have certain concerns on things, it's like, well, then, publish your, DA on Bitcoin, pay the higher fee, and then you can go the forced inclusion route. Of course, like we are going to push towards this idea of a decentralized sequencer, and we want all of it. We want the Holy Grail. But some of that research is still, we're still going to see how it plays out. But the point is, it's like, having a centralized single sequencer, it frankly has like tons of advantages, and it's not like a death knell to roll up. So it's something that I think we're aware of, but not super concerned with for the time being.
You can also just take some time and watch the attempts at decentralizing the sequencer on Ethereum, because there's a lot of competing teams, and yeah, it's a tricky one there. It seems like a lot of people are trying to just add more blockchains to decentralized sequencer, which is fine if you want to do that, but it's not intuitively much better. But that you brought up a point there. Go ahead, Sims.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that even problems should be reframed of decentralizing the sequencer versus just how do we enable, more censorship resistant rollups. I think that's what we're really going for. And that solution may be like decentralizing the sequencer, but let's explore that full problem space with the question being avoiding making these systems more censorship resistant.
Yeah,
I think that's the right question. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about this sort of the state of the art, the bleeding edge of BitVM right now. I want to ask about forced withdrawal, being able to force a transaction onto the L1. What does this look like currently with rollups on Bitcoin? What is like the research being done, and in terms of being able to exit unilaterally?
I think that with the BitVM approach, right, the high level kind of approach on that is there is an operator in the loop that is fronting withdrawal requests, and then they go and get reimbursements. And so there's certainly, when we talk about unilateral withdrawals, we typically think, not requiring, trusting anyone essentially. I mean, it's just, using the L1 as a way to get the withdrawal. I think that those trust assumptions, given the rollups today and the use of kind of the BitVM style construction, you still would need to trust, one of the operators out of, the federation of N operators to be there to, provide that reimbursement or that withdrawal for you, and then they would get their reimbursement. So true kind of unilateral withdrawals in the sense that there's you can immediately go to the L1 and not have to rely on any entity other than L1 wouldn't be possible. But through forced inclusion, you would be able to force a withdrawal request that a sequencer might be censoring on the rollup directly into the L1, and that withdrawal request needs to be handled by one of the operators, needs to get assigned to one of the operators in the next few operator withdrawals. I think there's sort of some approximations of being able to do that, but just to be clear, like there's still some of that trust requirement. I think that's why we're also excited about things like CAT and future opcodes. I think that's where the further reducing the trust assumptions on the bridge, particularly around fully unilateral withdrawals, come in, and that's a future that would be definitely exciting.
I'll just add, I don't think much of this is a big issue. If you have the one event trust assumption, most common users are just going to use an atomic swap bridge going from the Alpen BTC to BTC L1. They will never interact with the BitVM bridge. The BitVM bridge is going to be for very specialized actors, and those actors are going to be huge. They're probably going to be in the one event operator set themselves, effectively making it trustless. It is, a Paul Storks was right thing, kind of his idea with drive chains, where he's only specialized actors would use the drive chains bridge. The even if it takes 6 months, the peg would maintain itself. BitVM is just a further instantiation and a way, way, way more improved version of drive chains, but it's the same conceptual idea. Common user will never touch this thing.
And there would be, many services potentially in sort of open market for different, atomic swap providers to be able to, provide you the permissionless, trustless kind of withdrawals with from the BTC on the roll up back into Bitcoin.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm curious about is there is a difference between just the native asset and an asset in some type of contract. Is that correct? So in a sense, it's same applies to Ethereum for that matter. I guess if it's optimistic, I'm not sure on this. Maybe you can tell me. ZK may be different, right? You can actually prove the computation. Whereas if you're in some type of liquidity pool or derivative contract, you have to exit native ETH, right? It doesn't. You're not, and I'm wondering if this applies to Bitcoin as well. You're forced withdrawing the native asset. It's not going to necessarily apply to some type of, pool or, trade or whatever. Is that correct?
I think what you're saying, and maybe this is a nuanced point where it's can you unilaterally exit without creating a ZK proof? And it's my understanding is yes, if you're just holding BTC the asset,
yes,
you can unilaterally exit. But yes, if your funds are locked up in a smart contract, you would need to essentially progress the state of the L2 in order to exit the smart contract, and then you can perform the unilateral withdrawal. So it's kind of this nuanced point where it's do you need to create a zero knowledge proof to exit the rollup or not? It's well, it depends. And I think that was a point that was even brought up in the Sim Shinobi Shizon thread. Yeah,
Sims, do you have anything to add, or is that pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly some nuance on what kind of it comes out to kind of some of the limitations of the L1, where how much data do you actually need for that forced withdrawal. But I think in terms of the execution, you can force. I mean, you can design the forced inclusion in a way where when a sequencer is making, sequencers make this kind of state transition of the roll up. So they propose, hey, here's a, new state root, with this batch of transactions. And here's a snark, proof to on any kind of arbitrary claim. Of course, some of that claim is I transitioned, the last state to this state correctly. I executed all of the transactions correctly. You could also add statements like, I looked at since the last, state update to where I'm publishing today, all of these requests that were on L1 about forcing, a certain type of transaction to take place. And I've handled, those transactions properly. In that kind of design, you'd probably be able to simplify, not require the actual execution to take place on the L1, if that makes sense. Like you sort of, users can, indicate, that they would want, certain type of transaction on the roll up. They have fees and it's sort of valid, and within reasonable parameters, like the sequencer would need to show, hey, I have looked at all of the forced inclusion transactions that were indicated on the L1, and I have actually executed them, and so on. And so all of that, it can be done by the sequencer in circuit, but it's part of the statement. And if they don't prove that they've done that, then the proof would be false, and so they wouldn't be able to make a valid kind of state transition.
Interested in Bitcoin scaling, startups, or learning more about Bitcoin softworks? Join us Saturday, November 9th at the Fidelity Center in Boston, Massachusetts for Op Next, a one-day conference on scaling Bitcoin hosted by Blockspace Media, the producers of this podcast. Join Bitcoiners like Peter Todd, Portland Hodl, and more to discuss various Bitcoin proposals like OpCat, the Great Script Restoration, CTV, and more. Attend workshops, speaker sessions, and panels discussing the latest in scaling tech, from ZK to ARC to Bitcoin softwork history. And for a limited time, use code OCTOBER to get 25% off a general admission ticket. Find out more by visiting opnext.dev. Again, that's October at opnext.dev. You can find out more by checking out the show notes below.
Yeah, okay. I want to ask you about data availability. There's teams, so I would say there's like a good number of teams that are building on Bitcoin currently that are intending to use AltDA, and then there's people intending to put all the data on Bitcoin. What are some of the challenges here, and like what is kind of your design, and maybe once again, what's the bleeding edge, if you will, of this DA problem, if you consider it a problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely potentially a problem. Like the whole point of like these ZK rollups is that, in order to facilitate this trustless two-way peg or, one-event peg, you need the zero knowledge proof. In order to make sure that you can create the zero knowledge proof, you need to make sure you have the DA. In order to make sure you have the DA, like you have to post it on where you believe it will kind of, be credibly published. And that's on Bitcoin, but there's obviously block-based limitations on Bitcoin. So yeah, I mean, I think to start off, we'll definitely start by posting, all of the DA, or specifically the state differences, which is just like a compressed version of the DA on the Bitcoin L1. But that is definitely not sustainable, even if we were the only roll-up team posting on Bitcoin. So you are going to have to look at off-chain DA solutions. And this gets into that whole world of like, validiums and volitions, where the ZKPs are still posted on the Bitcoin L1, but the kind of DA is posted on another layer. Maybe you use something like Celestia, maybe you use something like Avail. Maybe we build something in-house. DA is like probably the single most tricky problem. It's a very difficult problem. I think the data availability sampling stuff like that Celestia has done is great. One of the main issues though is like, how do you handle when entities like withhold data? Like how do you prove that they were kind of malicious? Like you really can't. So even if you wanted to build like some sort of like slashing mechanism for it, you can't. So that's why Celestia has like a separate token. Why EigenLayer, is going to have this like, funky thing where they have, they bind their eigen and then it forks and it creates like a prediction market. I'll just, cap this up and say DA is a tricky problem. Like we do expect to have off-chain DA. I don't think we've made a decision yet whether that'll just be like a federation or whether that will be something kind of like a Celestia style chain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that, I think that the using off-chain DA for like a set of transactions, I think that's okay, and I think that like that is like certain transactions will want to use Bitcoin for data availability and inherit full security that way, double spend and liveness and so on. But I think there's also a whole bunch of transaction types and there's completely separate demand for still being able to access BTC in this kind of native way, but wanting like really cheap high performant kind of transactions. Ultimately that settles kind of through Bitcoin, and it's certainly still better design. I mean, a Validium design, if you look at it, is a lot more secure still than your sidechain design that you have today. But there's that market demand for not wanting to pay a lot of fees, and not necessarily even needing the full DA security from Bitcoin. And so, like for that, like there certainly will be an option, and over time, like we see, a lot of transactions just, wanting maybe a different kind of data availability sort of component. I think there are ways to still build that in a really secure way. I think again, like some of the, fear around that is still overblown. Like you still have like really good protocols, data availability sampling protocols that enable you to get, quite good level of security for those transactions when it comes to data availability.
Okay, how do you view now the kind of, I guess once again, this is kind of coming from the Ethereum ecosystem, but interoperability and some of these kind of arguments being made that, you have users coming onto these L2s and then they sort of try to create moats or walled gardens. And there's sort of this incentive for these rollups to keep these users on. And it may, I don't know how credible this argument is, but there's, people say, well, there's no incentive for Polygon and Arbitrum and Optimism to work together, right? How do you view this? I mean, maybe it's seems like a little bit more Wild West in Bitcoin, right? There's like less of a top-down approach to building out these rollups. So you guys have maybe a little bit more, I guess, freedom or autonomy to not even have to pretend maybe if you, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on like sort of this argument maybe with regards to rollups. And once again, I'm getting this from Ethereum, so you can adjust for Bitcoin as you see fit.
David, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what we've alluded to in a lot of this conversation, like we're in an advantageous position where we can see how a lot of the stuff in the Ethereum ecosystem plays out and then just, go off of that. I think everything is kind of trending towards this, whether you want to call it like Polygon ag layer or like, ZK Sync hyperchains. Yeah, I do think that they're in a tougher position because they have so many different rollup teams that all want to be kind of the ag layer, so to speak. I think that there's probably less of a barrier to find like this sort of alignment in Bitcoin, but some of that is TBD. I think John Charbonneau has kind of like written, as far as I know, the best content on this, where it's like, we're all building towards the same thing, where it's kind of this like, shared liquidity, like global state that can cross across these different chains. And a lot of that just comes down to you have to be sharing the same bridge contract. So, if we can find alignment with other teams where we all share the same bridge contract, then yeah, we can like trustlessly cross compose and share liquidity, amongst each other. If not, then yeah, you'll probably have, 2 or 3 teams that have like their own separate, BitVM style bridges. And then within each of their ecosystem, like all of these different execution environments, like trustlessly cross compose with each other. Yeah. I mean, the engineering team will probably like hate me for mentioning this. Like, of course, like those are things that we're like looking into and pursuing, but we just have like bigger battles that are kind of more pressing to fight like in the near term, which is frankly just getting, a basic EVM roll up and running. And then we can figure out, the, share liquidity stuff later down the line.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, I think that interoperability is very important for us. Like we do think that like this is, one problem that we've definitely seen rollups have on Ethereum, which is, the liquidity fragmentation, but also the UX kind of fragmentation coming out of, these rollups not being, super well like interoperable between one another. There's kind of a slow interoperability layer in between. So, on that front, like there's also some, cool research that we've been doing internally on this that we haven't shared yet. John Light, who leads a product at Alpen, he's been working on some cool stuff on that too. And we've been collaborating with others. We recently actually had a small event in New York City around interoperability in Bitcoin. And so it's certainly a focus area. And we think that like the key problems really to solve there is like how do we maybe unify the user experience across maybe different execution environments. We'll see definitely more innovation at the execution environment level on Bitcoin as well. Like that's we're already seeing that across other L1s, L2s. Like that's where a lot of the innovation really happens. And so how do we kind of create this future on Bitcoin where there can be new execution environments, but they can launch in a way that is interoperable with maybe existing rollups execution environments. and it's not so jarring, for the end user in terms of the UX, but it's also more capital efficient and less fragmented overall. Again, like this is one of those where there's definitely lessons to draw from Ethereum, and it's nice for us to be several years after experiments having taken place on Ethereum. We're looking at some of the research now coming out with things like AgLayer, as David mentioned, and seeing maybe if that fits within what we're trying to solve here, and other ideas. So we certainly have a lot of experimentation that's been done on Ethereum to look at and try to pull in some of the best things and bring it to Bitcoin. So that's certainly what's happening here.
I'll also quickly just add, shout out to the Lightning Labs team. I do know that they're kind of pursuing some of this, interop, and maybe if we can share that same bridge contract, I will be honest, the AgLayer, if that works, is a very compelling idea that you can kind of trustlessly, share this liquidity across these different chains. But if you can't find alignment, you have literally two different ecosystems, two different Bitcoin bridge contracts. Something like Lightning is compelling for that, and I think that's an advantage that Bitcoin maybe has over Ethereum as just one other possible solution to address this.
Yeah, and also you don't have people demanding tithes for being aligned constantly. There's not a foundation in Bitcoin screeching at you that you must be aligned with the Bitcoin mission. So that's fortuitous. I want to ask though, and this is an opportunity to just, I guess, chill. But so both you guys can take a stab at this. But there's all of these projects coming out, and some are already out. In some form or another. How does Alpen stand out, right? I know you guys have a very research heavy team. Liam, John Light, these guys come from Bitcoin backgrounds and have been in the space for a while. You built this team. How does Alpen stand out in this vast sea of rollups and projects and sidechains and everything that's being built on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I have some hot takes on this. I think Sims and I will agree that in the end, all the tech will be commoditized. And frankly, we hope so. Everybody builds towards the same thing. Iron sharpens iron. The users are the ones who win in that scenario. But, not just in our industry, in any industry, there are people who take products from 0 to 1, and then there's everyone else. And if I was to shill Alpen a bit, if you trace back the roots of virtually every conversation about, Bitcoin's ZK roles being built out, it came from research by our team. It could have been the very, very earliest article from someone like Trade Albanis, many years ago. It could be, John Light's research paper that really kind of put Bitcoin rollups on the map. It could be the technical white paper that, Sims and his other co-founders wrote. It could be some of the bleeding edge research that, Liam has done on ZK work, something that we have other people joining the team who I think have achieved frankly, kind of God tier and other, bleeding edge, crypto and privacy, projects. I think, we have positioned ourselves as the team that really is kind of pushed the frontier of this technology. And that's not to discount other teams who I think are also doing amazing work. But, I think that's ultimately what kind of differentiates ourselves is solving these hard problems. And it makes me think of kind of that little tweet battle that Sims got into with Shinobi and Chazon. I think on the last pod, they kind of said it's roll-up researchers are not targeting hard problems. It's they're running away from hard problems. It's dude, that is so laughable. If you look at our team, so much of what they've done is kind of push the frontier of what's possible in this space. So I think that's really kind of what differentiate ourselves. And then on the go-to-market side, we kind of hinted at this, but we are hyper-focused on money. If other teams want to, focus on other projects and kind of fragment their resources and go after, again, all these decentralized and Uber, that's great. Let them go for that. But we're focused on money and we're focused on solving the very hard, difficult research problems. And that's probably the differentiator that I see.
To David's point, there's a really, this is a, both difficult, cryptography and development tasks that we're after. It's no easy feat. To build a protocol that is truly secure and can be as safe as possible and show the work there and kind of build the trust that's necessary to have people take their money, real money, and actually use this software. I think the initial important point of this is we need to have the foremost best team of experts on research and development and and testing to actually build this thing. And so that's the approach that we took. Of course, we do think a lot of the tech commoditizes, as David mentioned, where a lot of we're committing to open sourcing both the research and the development of everything that we're working on, and have already open source a lot of this stuff, but we'll have more things coming out soon. I think that right now in the Bitcoin space, because of how nascent some of these technologies are, that technical advantage is definitely something that's valuable for us. We're investing in, we'll continue to invest in. But around now as well, we're really trying to kind of translate that technical advantage to how do we get the right distribution advantage, the ecosystem advantage come 12 months from now, as this kind of tech gets more and more commoditized. And so that's where our focus is. It's some combination of building the best, most practical, production ready bridge and native execution layer solution for Bitcoin. Investing really deeply at the research and development level, but at the same time balancing that with partnering with the right distribution partners, ecosystem partners, and everything that's necessary in terms of integration and whatnot for developers to have the best kind of developer experience building out applications around money.
Yeah, you reminded me of something. I know you guys maybe this past week released a paper on ZK coins. Was it Liam who released? Was it ZK coins? Is that what it's called? Can you just give a little bit of an overview of that? Maybe some privacy stuff you're working on, and then also, client side validation. I know this has been around for a little while, but seems like there's been some work on this. If you want to just give a quick overview. Yeah.
So the paper that came out was a collaboration with Jonas at Blockstream and Robin at ZeroSync and Liam at Alpen. And so this sort of builds on, this is called shielded CSV, client-side validation, and it builds on kind of earlier ideas that were in the space. So Robin had before introduced ZK coins, kind of right up, and it's I would say maybe best described as a meta protocol on Bitcoin for how to achieve kind of scalable but robustly private payment focused kind of transactions. The challenge and kind of actually where BitVM and some of the bridge effort that we're doing actually fits into that is, well, with this meta protocol, what is the underlying asset that's actually being privately scalably being traded with this protocol? Certainly, I think going with something like USDT or USDC would pose challenges because the issuers wouldn't want to mint the stable coins, on something that is robustly private. Having a way to get BTC, bridged and available in this kind of protocol is really valuable, and actually doing so in a way that there is no counterparty at all could be quite valuable. And BTC as a medium of exchange there would be interesting, but there's demand for stables as a medium of exchange. So potentially, can we get something like BTC collateralized stables, through the roll up, and those kinds of stable coins are actually available in this kind of privacy oriented protocol. That's another kind of tie-in. But I think it's really interesting work. I don't really want to kind of describe more. I think you should have Liam, Robin, Jonas, those guys on to talk about it. The key thing is it's quite efficient, relative to where we saw previous protocols like taproot assets and RGB, and it's robustly private as well, versus some of those other protocols.
Interesting. David, do you have anything to add? I know you're quite bullish on ZK coins and privacy in general, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I just think these are super based, protocols. They are a higher throughput alternative to something like Lightning Network. They are, reasonably, scalable. I think that they're, superior, privacy implementations than something like, Zcash. and, we can have them on Bitcoin. So, I could go into like the nuances of how client-side validation works, but I think that's probably like less interesting. The point is that this is like something that's new and useful.
Okay. So like a little bit tangentially related, just other Bitcoin L2 implementations in general, like Lightning has now been around for quite a while. There's been a lot of criticism of Lightning. I don't personally see rollups as being all that much in competition for what it's worth. Like I see rollups functionally scaling the expressivity of Bitcoin. Like this is how I view it, right? Like very in a reductive way. Lightning obviously was never intended to have AMMs, and so I think they're like functionally different. But we've also seen some other kind of L2 suggestions pop up as of late. I'm just curious your general thoughts, or if there's possibility for interoperability again. We've seen ARC, Fediment, like various Taproot assets was something that I think Lightning Labs was working on for a while. I don't know. Anyways, I don't know. Just your general thoughts on L2s outside of kind of like rollups or ZK rollups specifically.
I support all of these different builders in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I think it's totally great, but they all have like notable trade-offs. And yes, like rollups have trade-offs, but you can almost like implement them in a certain way where it's like, okay, like if you're willing to take on a certain trust assumption, like you can have the higher throughput chain. Like if you want to have a different execution environment, you can have it on a rollup. Like if you want to have pure censorship resistant, like you can post all your DA on Bitcoin. Like it's almost like a choose your own adventure in rollups. Like I really do think they're that flexible. And with each adventure that you go down, you're assuming some sort of like trade-off. With these other protocols, like they're almost like unidimensional. They can do one thing and one thing only. And I do think that there is still a place for Lightning. We really like that team and kind of the work that they're doing. But they're optimized for these high throughput payments. But that's kind of resulted in a lot of pain points on the UX. I think something like ARC is, kind of cool and compelling, but it has, massive liquidity constraints. Like the more throughput, the more payments that are being made, like the more liquidity that's kind of locked up in the ARC. Like this thing can get, orders of magnitude, like consume, all 21 million Bitcoin. Even other things like DLCs, I think are cool and compelling, but like, are they ultimately like that useful or that much of a breakthrough? I would argue no. So I just, in my mind, I know that I'm like kind of, talking my own book here, but I just think net of all trade-offs, like it's hard to compete with what rollups are doing right now. And even on a more like broader point, I think the intellectual capital that you see coming back into the Bitcoin space as a byproduct of like Bitcoin and ZK rollups coming back like behind the scenes. We're seeing, some of the largest names in the space of people who I think are actually like credible and not just like VCs looking for, like the next narrative to chase. People are like re-engaging and getting back interested in Bitcoin. And that is like something that I think it's hard to like quantify like how valuable that is to the broader Bitcoin space. And I don't think that those other projects have kind of attracted that like level of attention.
Yeah, definitely. I think intellectual capital around Bitcoin, getting more of that is certainly valuable. I think that comes partly from expressivity as well, and just being able to do more. I'd love to see, there's so many cool stuff with, I bias maybe towards ZK, but like the ZK email work, that's going on with, I'd love to see those kinds of innovation also, sort of orient around Bitcoin, or just like, how do we, go to the best kind of UX, leveraging keyless accounts, with BTC, and in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think expressivity, certainly is a way for attracting those innovators, and to do that in a way that is not like impacting, directly, like on the L1. It's not like impacting the complexity of whatever execution is sort of off chain in this off chain roll up protocol. And there's a certain abstraction with the L1, and it's not like really attacking or threatening the consensus. I think that makes a lot of sense to have. Ultimately, a lot of this also is. I'm very excited to see all these other solutions. I want to see more access and utility around BTC and Bitcoin, and so insofar as like these on-chain protocols and solutions, they enable ways. With custodial or centralized solution, like, it's just not going to be, globally accessible in the same way that perhaps these other kinds of solutions will be, and it'll be great to see like a plethora of different experimentation, and let the market kind of decide what's interesting.
Gwart, I want to hear from you. I want to know, like, do you think that there's better things that we should be building or better solutions than rollups? I mean, let's hear your hot takes here.
I'm happy to probably just generally agree with you guys. I will say, I mean, the one point I already made was that I don't see rollups being in competition with Lightning or Arc or Fedimint. I mean, maybe if Fedimint creates some federation where you can ostensibly have a federation that controls, the roll, but I don't see this being competition. I view rollups as extending the expressivity of Bitcoin, right? Like, and that's very different than scaling, like in the way that Lightning wanted to do. I came in, I came into crypto in 2017, but not seriously until 2020. And I thought Lightning was really cool. I didn't know that Lightning it's funny, it wasn't until I talked to Alex B, where he was explaining to me, is like, Lightning was sold as the end all be all, right? And that's sort of the contention now. That's what Eric and that's what Udi are pointing out. It's not that Lightning isn't really cool and Lightning isn't a great idea. It's that Lightning was sold as it was going to be the end game, right? And we've now seen, how LSP is centralized and how it's not really a peer-to-peer network. It's more of a routing network, and that's fine. But there's, points of centralization. My thing was that I was like, oh, Lightning's like sweet, but I never saw Lightning as being like, that's it, we got it done, right? So I never had this perspective that until, like I said, I talked to Alex B. He was saying, no, like actually, ironically, it was only the B cachers that were willing to look into Lightning because they wanted to disprove it, that we saw, sort of the pain points with Lightning. So, I mean, I think it's exciting to extend the expressivity of Bitcoin. I think that there are challenges, obviously, like we talked about DA, we talked about some of these, the BitVM bridges. I think you guys are, probably up there in terms of teams working on it. I think there's a lot of teams that are just kind of putting stuff out there. And that's kind of why I asked you to shill Alpen over, and not directly, but, so no, I'm like, I probably have similar thoughts that to you guys, I'd like just everybody run with it and see what happens. And I will say one thing, there is a lot more of a culture in Bitcoin of just go do your thing. I think that I have observed a fairly, top-down approach with Ethereum in terms of all this alignment stuff. And I don't think anybody on Bitcoin cares about that, right? Because functionally, Bitcoin has achieved that monetary premium that so many have desired. So I'm not like worried. I think that putting Bitcoin into more people's hands is a net positive, and the execution is where the value of execution ends up is not like a big concern. I wanted to ask, there has been Bitcoiners who have argued that if L2s have their own native tokens, this is parasitic to Bitcoin L1. Obviously, this depends on how you design the token. On Ethereum, they're still trying to figure out how they're doing that. But I just like broad strokes here. How do you view tokens, and if they are parasitic or take away from Bitcoin, the money being used on L2s?
You mean to sort of like pay for fees or gas, like on the L2?
Yeah, if that's, I don't know if there's teams doing that, or just tokens in general on these L2s. Do they detract from the L1? Does it remove, I guess, like, is this parasitic to, I would argue that rollups in general are not parasitic, but is the idea of these rollups having their own native tokens parasitic at all to the Bitcoin L1?
Yeah, I haven't looked into kind of different use cases, but like, if there's a token to pay the fees, to kind of think about it. In our design, like the BTC, that's bridged in. This is the fee token on the execution layer. On tokens, it's like it's hard. Like the point of tokens is to really do this incentive alignment. And I just fail to sort of see, where examples of where like the tokens have done good long-term kind of incentive alignment. for the ecosystem and for the users. Relative to, is it parasitic to L1 or not? I don't think I have any concrete thoughts, but relative to, is this, long-term valuable for the L2? I think, the jury's still out on it. I mean, you certainly would take on like certain regulatory, risks and, getting that incentive design to be correct, and, what for and whatnot. Like, I think these are important questions that often kind of just get overlooked and there's like, maybe some kind of governance token, in this way, or there's a lot of, getting the token right that I think ends up being just such a hard problem. And then on top of that, you'd have to kind of take on like certain regulatory risks, and like what is the reason to actually do it is an important question as well. Like, do you want it as a gas fee token? Do you want it as some kind of governance thing? And is that really the best kind of way to solve it? Like, we don't have a strong opinion on like, this is our stance on tokens. Like, partly because we don't really see kind of how that fits in, into what we're building, in the current roadmap.
So I was curious if you guys have, and like I said, I know you guys are still building and figuring a lot of this out, so no pressure to give like a firm response, right? But I'm curious, like, for example, Botanics, they are building Spider Chain, and they're taking, I think, 15 or 20% of the sequencer fees, and they're saying, look, we're performing a service and we're taking 20% of the fees, right? And it's like very reasonable in my opinion, It's like, so I'm curious if you have any like thoughts on where, are you just going to take the sequencer fees for performing a service now? Because the reason I ask is because I think Botanics is the only one that I've heard just kind of say this, and I was like, it's not a bad idea. Just you're providing this the mechanism and the sidechain is take 20% of the fees, and that seems pretty reasonable, right? And obviously they're using not native, but they're using Bitcoin as the fees for the Spider Chain. I'm curious what your plans are for that. Maybe sequencer fees specifically.
Yeah, I mean the sequencer, the transaction fees paid on the rollup, in part go to the footprint on the L1 that pays the Bitcoin fees, and in part goes to the service on the rollup, that for batching and improving the transactions. And so those are captured, by the sequencer. In terms of what the fee rates would be, how much is captured. This is something that we haven't really cemented a particular thing on, but there will be some value captured through the sequencer. I think personally it makes sense to kind of prioritize growth even more and minimize those fees as much as possible. But over time, there's definitely some valuable service provided by the sequencers and the provers on the rollup. So there'd be sort of transaction fees associated with that, according to how much cost it takes to provide those services.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Coinbase released cBTC recently, and they are making it very seamless to go directly from your Coinbase account to a version of wrapped Bitcoin on Base and elsewhere. Maybe first of all, what are your thoughts just in general about, wrapped Bitcoin on Base? And I know wrapped Bitcoin is an actual coin, so we should use the real terminology, cBTC on Base. And then the follow-up is, how do you give yourself a competitive advantage versus something like Coinbase, which has a massive user base and can easily onboard to their own, little walled garden roll up?
Coinbase is a tough one. And I think especially if I'm in the Ethereum ecosystem, I'm kind of like, crapping my pants and being like, holy shit, like, how do we even, compete with Coinbase? And I will say generally, like, I think Coinbase has been a net good actor for like the ecosystem. I think that within reason for being a centralized company, they've tried to operate to the best of their ability. Like, they've massively increased adoption. So shout out to Coinbase in that sense. On the other hand, like, they are essentially like the galactic evil empire. And I think there's probably two ways that we can compete against Coinbase. Like, one, is, it's an us versus them mentality. Again, like we are creating the kind of like, the resistance, like the Rebel Alliance, like we are more focused on actually like trustless BTC, self-custodial BTC, like censorship resistant BTC. You pursue it more on this like ideological front. And I think that will gain some amount of traction, but some people would say, well, like, all right, hey, cool, man. Like the entire rest of the globe, like does not care about like your ideological stuff. Like they just want like the clean UX and, they're going to opt for Coinbase. The other way that you kind of compete with Coinbase, which kind of might make some people a bit uncomfortable, but I think the reality is like you have to compete for those pariah markets that Coinbase, will not go after. And that is some stuff like, maybe like overlooked, smaller markets, which will have more difficult being penetrated into. And then really kind of activities like, privacy. And I think privacy is like the one where people are like, holy shit, like I don't want to go to prison, but like that, many of us are kind of like privacy pilled and believe that this is, like a human right. And I think, Coinbase, as much as they say they're kind of going after this, like, decentralized market, like they are not going to touch privacy. And I think very much you can almost pursue this like Euro-dollar-esque type of strategy, which, a quick tangent, but I'll bring it back. Like if you're a good little Bitcoiner, like, your monetary history, that like World War II happened, Bretton Woods happened. And then, like we agreed to be on this dollar standard. But, in the 1950s, there were all of these offshore entities who couldn't get access to like US dollars, maybe because they were like rogue pariah nations like Russia. And long story short, like the Eurodollar, like is now, the majority of the ways that like dollars in the entire, globe exist. And the point I'm making here is like, there are these industries, which like certain actors or certain segments of the market that like certain actors are like unwilling to go after. And I don't want to like show our cards too much, but if you can capture the demand for these markets, then that could actually be channeled into economic incentives. So we could have a situation where like if we capture this market for, privacy or some of these, global south markets, then that could be channeled into ways to where maybe you're generating like true, real higher yield, or maybe you're able to like, borrow at lower rates, or you're able to take things and actually channel these into, strategic advantages where Coinbase cannot compete, where actually like on an economic incentive level, like you are able to provide a better experience. And so I think it's this fine line that we essentially have to walk, but it's like the fact that Coinbase, I think, is scared and unwilling to go after some segment of the market, which we think that there's like a substantial need, is really where they get exploited, not just on the ideological level, but on the actual economic level.
Definitely. And I think privacy is, both an ideological thing, but also very practical. Without better privacy, I can't imagine how we're planning to onboard, so much, financial activity on chain. Payments as an example, like that, like this is something that, maybe, the current user base is fine, without, but as we think about bringing, a lot more of the financial activity in the world on chain, it ends up being a really big friction point for businesses to have their transactions mined, or even individuals that wouldn't want their transactions to be accessible. So the long game definitely includes privacy, not just as it's ideological. Of course, it's a human right, but something that is just necessary, I think.
100% agree. Okay. Oh wait, I have one quick question. Is Alpen, when it comes to launch time, would you be able to connect with like MetaMask? I know it's an EVM chain, so is this like something you just add the Alpen network? I'm curious. Similar to like some of these other current EVM compatible Bictoin L2s or sidechains or whatever. Is this like a you can connect? Okay, cool.
Yeah, and a little more alpha leak here, Gwart, on the show. So we have DevNet launching first week of October.
Awesome.
And folks can sign up and start tinkering around with DevNet and playing around with the integrations as well.
Do you have any approximate alpha timeline for mainnet and full blown launch?
We'll cover that more in the upcoming announcements. But post DevNet, a lot of the focus is going towards the development of a stronger bridge. And as we iterate towards that, we'll get into testnet, and then from there, a big part of this is before we get to mainnet, we need to feel very, very good about, this is real people's money. And it's not something that, we need to take into, the utmost kind of careful consideration, that our systems are robust. And so that will be probably the biggest variable around the mainnet timeline is, do we feel that the systems that we built are truly robust and can be fully secured with money?
Well, do you guys have anything else to add? I appreciate you coming on.
No, man, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having us and great work on the pod.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Gwart.